Imagine everything you worked for, every bit of trust and respect you've earned, being ripped apart in front of the world. That's exactly what happened to Amy on Heartland. A documentary crew arrived, cameras rolling, with promises to tell her story, but instead, they trapped her in moments that would shatter her reputation forever. Friends whispered, rumors spread, and Amy found herself facing a reality she'd never imagined. This is the story of how one project turned Amy's world upside down. Amy had always been the heart of the ranch, the one everyone turned to in a crisis, the person who could soothe a frightened horse or calm a tense argument. On this particular morning, the sun was just beginning to rise over Heartland, painting the fields in gold and casting long shadows across the barn. Everything seemed normal, almost too normal, but today something felt different. There was an undercurrent of tension that Amy couldn't quite put her finger on. A quiet warning hidden beneath the usual sounds of the ranch. The documentary crew arrived in the early hours, quietly unloading cameras and lights, their movements precise and professional. At first, Amy thought it was just another day of interviews, nothing more than cameras following her daily routine. She smiled for the crew, answering their questions politely, unaware that each answer, each casual laugh, each hesitation was being recorded for a story that might not be kind. The crew's presence seemed harmless, even flattering at first. They praised her knowledge of horses, her dedication to the ranch, and the way she handled every situation with care. But beneath the smiles and polite words, there was a subtle manipulation she didn't notice. Every camera angle was chosen to make her look vulnerable. Every question crafted to make her second-guess herself. As the morning progressed, Amy guided the crew around the ranch, showing them the barns, introducing them to the horses, and sharing anecdotes from her life. She laughed when Ty told a joke, nodded respectfully when Lou offered advice, and moved from scene to scene believing this was just another day of work. But the crew's cameras lingered a little too long on her pauses, capturing moments that, when taken out of context, could seem like uncertainty or weakness. Even small gestures, a nervous glance, a sigh, a quick glance at her watch were recorded, waiting for the perfect moment to be misinterpreted. By mid-morning, Amy felt a slight unease creeping in, something about the way the camera angles shifted. The way the crew seemed to focus on her reactions rather than the story made her heart beat a little faster. Still, she dismissed it, telling herself she was overthinking. She had faced challenges before, and she was confident in her ability to handle this. But what she didn't realize was that the crew wasn't here to tell the truth. They were here to craft a narrative, and she was the centerpiece. Meanwhile, Ty and Lou noticed the subtle change in Amy's demeanor. Ty tried to reassure her with a gentle hand on her shoulder, whispering that everything would be fine. Lou offered a supportive smile, suggesting they take a break and have some coffee. But even with their support, Amy couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The ranch seemed quieter than usual, the birds' songs softer, the wind whispering in ways that hinted at trouble. Little did Amy know, the storm was already brewing. And the cameras that followed her every move were capturing not just her actions, but the very moments that would later be used to destroy the reputation she had built with love, hard work, and integrity. By the time lunch rolled around, the crew had interviewed Amy for hours. They had her recount moments of vulnerability, ask about her mistakes, and share personal thoughts, all while filming with an intensity that made her feel exposed. Amy thought she was telling her story, her real story, but the crew was collecting fragments, pieces they could twist, edit, and reshape. The tension that had started as a whisper grew stronger, though she didn't yet know why. The calm of the morning was over, replaced by an undercurrent of anxiety she couldn't yet name. And in that quiet, subtle way, the first threads of what would become a complete unraveling of Amy's reputation were being spun. The cameras weren't just recording Amy, they were hunting for something, though she had no idea what. At first, the crew seemed professional, polite, even encouraging, as they asked her about her daily routines, her bond with the horses, and her dreams for the ranch. But as the day went on, their questions began to shift. Subtle, pointed inquiries slipped in, almost invisible at first, designed to make Amy second-guess herself. "Have you ever felt like you weren't doing enough?" one interviewer asked. smiling as if it were casual conversation. Another asked, "Do you ever worry people might see you differently than you hope?" Amy answered honestly, her words sincere and open. She shared stories of small failures, moments when a horse was injured under her care, times she felt overwhelmed by responsibilities, and insecurities she rarely admitted aloud. To her, these were normal reflections, honest glimpses into a life spent caring for others. But the cameras captured everything: the pauses, the sighs, the fleeting looks of doubt, and every frame was a tool the crew could use to paint a story that wasn't really hers. Behind the lenses, the crew whispered among themselves, coordinating angles, lighting, and timing. They laughed softly at things Amy didn't notice, shaking their heads at moments they planned to exaggerate. Every decision was calculated to make her look unsure, distracted, or flawed. They weren't just telling a story, they were shaping one, creating tension, planting seeds of doubt that would later explode across screens and social media. Meanwhile, Amy's friends remained unaware of the crew's subtle manipulation. Ty followed her with concern, noticing her furrowed brow and occasional hesitation. But she brushed it off, insisting she was fine. Lou offered quiet guidance, yet even their support couldn't pierce the invisible web of control the crew had spun around her. Each step Amy took was being documented, dissected, and cataloged for maximum effect. Every laugh, every tear, every whispered self-doubt became material for a story that would make her vulnerable in ways she hadn't imagined. By mid-afternoon, Amy began to notice small inconsistencies. Questions repeated in slightly different forms, seemingly innocent comments that made her uncomfortable. Moments where the camera would linger on her while ignoring the surroundings. The tension was subtle, almost imperceptible, but her instincts told her something was off. She paused during an interview, looking around the set with a faint unease, wondering if she was imagining things. But the crew's smiles reassured her, or at least she thought they did, as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Shadows stretched across the ranch, giving an eerie feeling to the normally welcoming spaces. Amy continued to engage with the crew, unaware that the story they were crafting was no longer about her accomplishments or dedication. It was about drama, stakes, and flaws magnified for effect. The crew's hidden agenda was clear to them, but invisible to her, to create a narrative that would leave her exposed. Her reputation questioned, and her every action scrutinized by those who didn't know the full story. By the end of the day, Amy felt exhausted but content. She thought she had shared her story honestly, believing in the good intentions of the crew. What she didn't know was that the footage collected today would later be twisted, edited, and presented in a way that made her appear careless, insecure, and untrustworthy. Every word, every glance, every moment captured would become ammunition against her. And as she left the ranch for the evening, she had no idea that the storm gathering just beyond the camera lenses was about to hit her life, and reputation harder than she could ever imagine. The morning air was crisp, almost deceptively peaceful, but Amy felt a subtle tension she couldn't shake. The documentary crew returned with renewed energy, cameras rolling, microphones poised, and notebooks in hand. What had started as casual filming now carried a sharper edge. The questions were no longer neutral. They were designed to unsettle. One producer leaned in slightly, voice calm but probing. "Amy, do you ever feel like people might judge your decisions here at the ranch?" Amy paused, slightly flustered. She had never thought about judgment in that way, at least not openly. She answered honestly, trying to stay composed, unaware that her words could later be framed to imply doubt or incompetence. The crew's subtle tactics began to take shape. Every compliment was paired with an insinuation, every question with a loaded undertone. Amy laughed nervously at a casual comment about handling the horses, but the camera lingered just long enough to capture a flicker of uncertainty on her face. A simple shrug was filmed from multiple angles, making a normal gesture appear like hesitation. Even her carefully chosen words, meant to be candid and heartfelt, were caught on multiple microphones, ready to be cut and edited to emphasize flaws instead of honesty. Meanwhile, whispers from behind the cameras suggested something darker. The producers were communicating through subtle signals, nods and hand gestures, coordinating which moments to highlight later. Their smiles didn't reach their eyes, They were calculating, analyzing Amy like a puzzle they could manipulate. She had no idea she was the centerpiece of a narrative that would twist reality, taking her genuine moments of vulnerability and presenting them as weaknesses for dramatic effect. As the interviews continued, Amy began to feel a strange heaviness in the air. Questions became more personal, probing past mistakes and insecurities she rarely admitted. "Have you ever regretted a decision here?" one asked casually, but the tone carried a sharp edge. Another probed, "Do you ever feel like your mistakes could affect the people who rely on you?" Amy answered carefully, trying to explain that everyone makes mistakes, that the ranch was a team effort. She laughed lightly to ease the tension. But even that laugh, recorded from multiple angles, could later be spun to suggest nervousness or dishonesty. Ty, watching from a distance, noticed a slight change in Amy's posture, the way she crossed her arms or avoided certain glances. He wanted to step in, to reassure her, but he couldn't interfere without disrupting the filming, and the crew subtly discouraged any interruption, claiming it would ruin the authenticity of the story. Lou, sensing the crew's subtle manipulation, stayed close, offering quiet support. But even her presence couldn't shield Amy from the carefully constructed trap by mid-afternoon. Amy's unease grew into a gnawing feeling of vulnerability. Small, seemingly harmless moments were stacking up, each one captured perfectly by the ever-present cameras. A slip of the tongue, a hesitant glance, even a frown. These ordinary reactions were being quietly documented, waiting to be reshaped into something sinister. She couldn't see it yet, but the first cracks in her public image had already begun to form. Her reputation, built over years of hard work and trust, was teetering on the edge, all while she tried to remain kind, professional, and composed. As the day drew to a close, Amy finally realized that something was wrong, but she didn't understand the full extent. She felt exposed, tired, and uncertain. Yet the crew's smiles and polite encouragement masked the danger she was in. Every word she had spoken, every gesture she had made, was being silently filed away, ready to be rearranged and presented to the world in a way that could shatter everything she had worked for. The calm of the morning was gone, replaced by a tension that hinted at the storm to come. The storm that would turn friends into skeptics, whisperers into critics, and Amy's reputation into a fragile target for public scrutiny by the time the afternoon sun cast. Long shadows across the Heartland Ranch, Amy could no longer ignore the strange energy in the air. The crew's smiles had grown sharper, their questions sharper still, each one carefully designed to provoke, unsettle, and catch her off guard. At first, the prompts seemed innocent, almost curious. "Do you ever feel like your decisions disappoint others? Have you ever doubted yourself when handling the horses?" But as Amy spoke, the subtle malice behind each inquiry became clear. Every word she uttered, every pause, every sigh, was meticulously documented, framed in ways that would later make her appear uncertain and untrustworthy. What Amy didn't realize was that the crew had begun selectively filming moments for later use. A camera that had previously followed her casually now zoomed in, catching the faint tremor in her hands as she brushed hay off a horse. A mic that had recorded ambient sounds now lingered on the slight catch in her voice when she spoke of a mistake that she'd made weeks ago. These small, natural moments were being captured not to tell her story but to distort it. The crew whispered among themselves, exchanging nods and glances, plotting how to twist these fragments into a narrative of failure rather than resilience. Amy's friends started to notice the subtle shift too. Ty, who usually relied on her calm presence to steady his own nerves, sensed her tension growing with each question. Lou, aware of Amy's discomfort, quietly tried to offer support, suggesting breaks or lighthearted conversations to ease the strain. But even their interventions were carefully monitored by the crew. Cameras seemed to follow Amy exclusively, deliberately ignoring the warmth of her friendships and support. In the footage being captured, only Amy's reactions would be seen, the moments of uncertainty magnified, the context erased. The crew's manipulation didn't stop at words and camera angles. They began to plant ideas indirectly, comments meant to make Amy doubt herself. Sometimes people think even the best work isn't enough. one producer remarked casually, almost in passing. Another questioned, "Do you worry that your mistakes might affect the ranch?" Amy answered earnestly, explaining that mistakes were part of life, that every misstep taught her something. But every reply was filmed with an intensity that could later portray her as defensive, guilty, or overwhelmed. Each clip was a piece of a puzzle that the crew intended to rearrange into a picture far from the truth as filming continued. Amy's fatigue became more visible. Her movements were slower, her smiles more forced, and her eyes occasionally darted toward the cameras with a flicker of doubt. To the casual observer, these were ordinary signs of a long day, but in the hands of the crew, these fleeting moments would become evidence of weakness, indecision, and vulnerability. Amy's once strong reputation, built on years of trust, compassion, and dedication, was beginning to erode in ways she could neither see nor anticipate. By late afternoon, a subtle but growing unease settled over the ranch. Rumors whispered among the crew suggested that the best footage to tell a dramatic story had been captured. Their focus on Amy had shifted from chronicling her day to crafting a narrative designed to shake her public image. Amy, exhausted and unaware of the full extent of their plan, packed up her things, thinking the day had been a success. She had no idea that the most damaging moments of her life, framed perfectly on camera, were already being prepared to broadcast her vulnerability to the world. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the ranch in twilight. Shadows stretched across the fields, mirroring the growing tension in Amy's life. The calm facade of the day was gone, replaced by the subtle, unseen sabotage of a crew whose intentions were far from innocent. Amy left the ranch that evening with a heavy heart, unaware that every smile, every hesitation, and every word she had shared had been captured, cataloged, and manipulated, laying the foundation for the storm that would soon threaten everything she held dear. The next morning, the ranch felt different. There was a weight in the air that Amy couldn't quite shake, an invisible tension that made even the familiar creak of the barn doors feel ominous. The documentary crew returned, this time with an energy that was harder to read. Their questions were sharper, their focus more intense, and the subtle manipulation that had been building over the past days was now unmistakable. Amy tried to maintain her composure, but there was a gnawing sense that she was no longer in control of her story. Every word she spoke, every gesture she made, was being carefully framed for impact. It wasn't just the cameras anymore, it was the anticipation. The crew hinted at upcoming previews for the public, casual mentions of how others might react to her story. Amy laughed nervously, brushing off the comments, but deep down, a chill ran down her spine. She began to notice the small ways the crew amplified tension, lingering shots of her pausing mid-sentence, close-ups of her furrowed brow, angles that made ordinary expressions appear uncertain or defensive. Every moment was meticulously orchestrated, designed to suggest weakness, doubt, and guilt. By mid-morning, the first previews of the footage were shown to a small audience, the crew, a few ranch staff, and a trusted confidant who had been asked to provide feedback. Amy watched from a distance, her heart sinking as the clips played. Scenes she had thought were casual, innocent glimpses of daily life, were edited to emphasize hesitation, anxiety, and indecision. A simple laugh at Ty's joke was framed to suggest nervousness. A moment of reflection while brushing a horse was portrayed as uncertainty about her abilities. Amy's stomach dropped as she realized how easily her genuine emotions could be twisted into something unrecognizable. The whispers among the crew grew louder. Subtle smirks exchanged as they noted which segments would generate the most dramatic impact. Amy's friends, though supportive, could not completely shield her from the effect. Ty's comforting hand on her shoulder and Lou's quiet encouragement were barely included in the footage, leaving her moments of vulnerability isolated, magnified, and exposed. Amy's chest tightened with every frame, each edit chipping away at the careful image she had built over years of hard work and dedication. By late afternoon, the footage was being shared more widely internally at first, then with select media outlets. Social media buzzed quietly, small comments appearing online that questioned Amy's competence and judgment. Rumors began to spread, fueled not by malice, but by the way the footage was presented. Friends and neighbors, unaware of the manipulation, started to whisper, their opinions shaped by incomplete information. Amy felt the first real sting of public scrutiny, a painful recognition that her private dedication and honesty could be misinterpreted so easily. Amy confronted the crew, her voice tight but steady, asking how they could twist her story this way. They smiled politely, feigning misunderstanding, insisting that it was simply telling the story authentically and that audiences loved drama. The weight of betrayal hit Amy harder than she expected. She had welcomed the cameras into her life with trust, only to find herself trapped in a narrative that was no longer hers. The calm, confident woman who had walked across the ranch that morning was fading, replaced by a version of herself that the world was being led to believe was flawed, anxious, and unreliable. As the sun set, the first comments and whispers reached Amy through texts, phone calls, and passing conversations. Her stomach twisted with a mix of anger, disbelief, and fear. The storm that had been quietly gathering was now crashing around her. And she realized that the struggle wasn't just to reclaim her story, it was to salvage her reputation, her relationships, and her very sense of self. What had begun as a simple documentary project had become a weapon, and Amy was now caught in the crossfire. The days following the release of the footage were heavy and unrelenting. Amy moved through the ranch almost like a ghost. The once familiar sounds of hooves on the barn floor and the whisper of the wind through the fields, now feeling alien. The documentary crew had left, but their work lingered, circulating quietly at first, then spreading faster than she could keep up with. Even casual conversations among neighbors and friends carried a cautious tone, filtered through the lens of what the footage had shown. Amy felt eyes on her wherever she went, some sympathetic, others judging. It weighed on her heart more than she expected. Her trust had been shattered. Every gesture, every word she had shared in good faith now seemed like a potential weapon used against her. The moments she had thought reflected dedication and care correcting a horse's gait, patiently explaining training techniques, gently calming a scared animal, were being misinterpreted, edited to suggest uncertainty, insecurity, and ineffectiveness. The weight of perception, shaped by carefully manipulated footage, began to erode the confidence she had always carried like armor. Each whisper she overheard, each raised eyebrow, each side conversation chipped away at her sense of identity. Ty and Lou stood quietly at her side, offering support that was steadfast but limited. Ty would brush a strand of hair from her face, his gaze steady and protective, whispering words of reassurance. Lou reminded her of all she had accomplished, of every life she had touched, of the countless successes the cameras had never recorded. Yet even their encouragement could not erase the sting of public doubt or undo the careful editing that made her appear vulnerable. Amy realized that reclaiming her story would require more than explanations. It would require strength, resilience, and strategic action. The first step was reflection. Amy spent long hours walking the pastures alone, replaying the moments captured on camera, analyzing how each one could have been misrepresented. She recognized that while she could not control what had been filmed, she could control her response. Determination began to replace despair. She started jotting down her thoughts, framing her narrative, considering ways to tell her side of the story authentically, without the distortion of outside influence. For the first time since the footage had been released, a spark of agency returned. Yet even as she planned, the pressure remained immense. The ranch, usually a place of comfort and stability, now carried echoes of scrutiny. Every casual interaction with friends, neighbors, or ranch staff risked being seen through the lens of suspicion or gossip. Amy realized that the road ahead would not be easy. Reclaiming trust and rebuilding her reputation would require patience, courage, and careful navigation of public perception. The reality was stark. The world had seen a version of Amy she did not recognize, and she had to confront the challenge of being misunderstood while maintaining her authenticity. Despite the tension, Amy found small victories in everyday moments. A horse she had trained responded perfectly. A younger ranch hand followed her guidance successfully, and Ty's unwavering support reminded her that not all eyes were critical. These moments became the foundation for resilience. Proof that her true abilities and character were not defined by the distorted lens of the documentary crew. Slowly, she began to understand that reputation could be tested, twisted, and even damaged, but her integrity, her passion, and her perseverance were hers to reclaim. By the end of the week, Amy's resolve had strengthened. She knew the path ahead would involve confrontation, explanation, and perhaps even public statements, but she also knew she would not allow a manipulated narrative to define her. The ranch, the horses, and the community she loved were still hers, and she was determined to restore her reputation. Piece by piece, through courage, honesty, and the undeniable truth of her dedication. The storm had hit, but Amy was not broken. She was preparing to rise, stronger and more determined than ever. The day arrived when Amy could no longer remain silent. The footage that had haunted her for weeks was everywhere. Rumors whispered at the barn, comments in the town square, and subtle glances from people she had once trusted implicitly. The weight of public scrutiny pressed down on her. Yet instead of crumbling under it, Amy found a quiet fire igniting inside her. She realized that the narrative crafted by the documentary crew was not the truth, it was a distortion. And she would not allow her story, her integrity, or her reputation to be stolen without a fight. With Ty and Lou by her side, Amy decided it was time to reclaim her voice. She gathered the people she trusted most and began carefully explaining what had really happened. Breaking down each misleading moment and sharing the true context behind every scene, she spoke openly about the stress, the mistakes, the challenges, and the dedication she poured into every aspect of the ranch. Her sincerity radiated, her words piercing through the fog of manipulation, slowly reshaping the way people saw her. Even those who had doubted began to listen. Realizing that the truth had always been hidden behind carefully edited clips, but just as she started to regain some sense of control, a new tension arose. The documentary crew, seemingly finished, sent an unexpected message. They had more footage, moments Amy hadn't remembered, and they hinted it could be even more revealing. A cold shiver ran down her spine. The storm she had survived so far was only the beginning. The crew had planted seeds of chaos that could still grow, and Amy understood that this fight was far from over. Her reputation had survived the first wave, but the real test, public vindication and full exposure of the truth, was yet to come. Amy took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. She knew that navigating the coming challenges would require more than defense. It would require strategy, courage, and the unwavering support of those she loved. Ty squeezed her hand, his silent reassurance giving her the strength to face whatever lay ahead. Lou's calm confidence reminded her that she was not alone in this battle, that her integrity was undeniable, and that no amount of distorted footage could ever change the truth of who she was. As the sun dipped behind the rolling fields of Heartland, Amy stood at the edge of the pasture, gazing at the horizon. The ranch, the horses, and the people she loved were her foundation. Unshakable, despite the chaos that had threatened her world. The documentary crew may have tried to destroy her reputation, but Amy had proven that resilience, honesty, and determination could withstand even the most calculated attacks. And yet, the final scenes of this episode hinted at an even darker twist, something unseen. A secret the crew had captured that could ignite the next wave of drama. The camera would not be needed to show her strength. Only her unwavering presence, the fire in her eyes, and the resolve in her heart. Amy had survived the storm, but the story was far from over. As the screen fades to black, a single line of text appears. The truth is coming, and this time it will leave no secrets. Viewers are left on the edge, heart pounding, eagerly anticipating the next chapter in Amy's journey, a chapter where resilience, revelation, and revenge might collide in ways no one saw coming.